Hello, everyone. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Alexander, and thank you to all the organizers of Typographics for inviting me to speak, and thank you to all of you for being here. As mentioned, I'm the design director of the New York Times Magazine. I've been with the magazine for about 14 years, and I became the design director in late 2014, right before we did our most current redesign. I'm going to talk about that, and more specifically about the role of typography in the magazine since the redesign. But first, I'm just going to give you a little bit of history on the magazine. It's been around since 1896. This is the first cover that you're looking at. It was initially a broadsheet, and it was conceived as a place for literary and long-form writing. It was and still is a general interest magazine that is distributed in the Sunday edition of the paper. Because it's a weekly, we make 52 issues per year, and that is a lot of magazines. These are all the covers that we made this past year, or actually not quite all of them, but most of them, and this is what the magazine looks like now. So we cover a huge variety of topics, politics, sports, pop culture. We do a lot of investigative pieces. I could go on, but you get the idea. It's really varied. And we try to be as ambitious as we can every week. So in 2014, we got a new editor, Jake Silverstein, and that was the impetus for the most recent redesign. He had a different vision for the magazine. He had different content he wanted to introduce, and also he wanted to make the magazine a little bit more literary. So we started with the logo, and we worked with Matthew Carter on this. We really didn't want to radically change the old logo. We wanted to more modernize it and make it elegant. So let's see. The old logo is in red, the new logo is in blue, and you can see it's wider and more generously spaced. And it's hard to see kind of all of the differences until you really get up close. So you can see there is more contrast between the thick and thin strokes. It's geometric, it's cleaner, and I think the biggest change is to the letter A. So one of the main things that you change when you do a redesign is the typography, and we decided to commission an entirely new suite of typefaces for use in the magazine, and decided to work with Henrik Kubel of A2. So when we briefed him, we said we wanted modern typefaces rooted in history, and we wanted 3 distinctly different typefaces that complemented each other. We really didn't want a family of related fonts, for example, like a serif font that we could chop the serifs off of to make another font, to make a sans, because we thought that really wouldn't have enough variety or energy for the kind of topics that we cover. We wanted it to be more dissonant. So once we decided that we were going to make these all new typefaces, we had a challenge, which was how to maintain the connection to our brand when we were introducing all these entirely new fonts. What you're looking at here is a layout from the 60s, and it uses Stymie, which is a typeface that has been in the magazine for decades. And I would consider this our legacy font. It's really the font that I think people most associate with our brand. So we knew moving forward that we really wanted to have a condensed font in the magazine. It helps to get scale on headlines and make things that really have graphic impact. So we decided to commission a condensed typeface using Stymie as a starting point. Sorry, it's that font right there. And we did this really to maintain a connection to our typographic history. So let's see. The top is Stymie, the bottom is our condensed slab. So you can see some of the characters are really very much the same. And for some, we really departed and tried to modernize them. And we did several weights of the slab. And then later we decided to add even more condensed versions. So the sans was the hardest to get right. Henrik basically told me that we gave him the nightmare brief that all type designers want to avoid, where we asked him to make a modern sans based off of a classic font. We didn't want it to be trendy. We really wanted it to be unique. But he said that just kind of all the details really affected the look and feel. So you move in one direction, you look like Futura. You move a little bit in the other direction, you look like Gil. But I think we eventually got to a place that's good, that feels distinct, but is also kind of classic. The italics. So this is our serif display, and for this, Henrik took inspiration from the geometry and the contrast in our logo. So we had our display fonts. And, yep, oops, sorry. Yeah, this is the entire suite. It's 40 in all. He did all of this work in about 2.5 months, so I don't think he slept at all. And this is a markup of some of the feedback that we gave Henrik. One of the lessons that I learned from this process is that often, picking at individual letters of a font really ends up neutering the font. So when things that seem off when you're looking at things in isolation are often the things that give the font its personality when it's set. So it was important that we worked with a typographer who we really trusted and whose sensibility we really liked, because he often pushed back. So there was a lot of give and take in the process, and I think that's what really made it work. So now I'm going to show you a few spreads of our typefaces in use. This is our sans for a story on PTSD. The serif in a literary story about the role of manners or lack of in society today. A more aggressive treatment with our condensed slab, and that's for a story on attempts to make rugby appeal to Americans. This is the italicized version of our serif font, and that's for a pretty hard-hitting piece on Jared Kushner's real estate business practices. Sometimes the type can be a lot quieter when the image is doing more of the heavy lifting. That's the case for this story on how teenagers are getting most of their information about sex through pornography. And for this story on the mortality rates of Black mothers and infants, the piece talked a lot about how racism plays a role on that. And I think the design really needed to take a back seat to the content because the message was so serious. I think Restraint can be a really powerful tool, but it can also kind of seem sometimes to readers like a default. But often when we kind of go down this avenue, we've tried a number of different treatments before we settle on a simpler one. So the first headline we got for this was twice as vulnerable. This is one of the layouts the designer tried. And also this. And I think these felt a little tonally off. They're a little too playful. They're a little maybe too clever for the topic. So we find ourselves often asking, if it feels right to introduce a design idea over the actual content of the story, and call attention to the design in that way. And sometimes the answer is no. It just really needs to be more straight. So the classic challenge of magazines is that every week you have the same format, the same fonts, and really different stories. So you try to come up with innovative ways to use your toolkit of fonts to tell those stories. And we do a lot of that, but we also look outside our arsenal of fonts to tell stories. And our partnership with Henrik has been really helpful for that, in that he's become a frequent collaborator. So I said he drew 3 new taller versions of our condensed slab serif after the redesign. This is an even taller version that he drew for us, just as a one-off for this story on the Greek financial crisis. So often Henrik will make things for us that we use in a special issue. This is a stencil version of our serif font that he made for us for a health issue, and then we just ended up liking it so much that we just sometimes use it on the regular weekly. We also sometimes use some of Henrik's fonts in combination with ours. This is for a story on Lorde that was published when she released her album in 2017. And it's a combo of New Grotesque, our sans, and also I think the O is actually hand-drawn just to kind of get the weight right so that it worked with the P's. We also collaborate with other designers and illustrators, and often we do that for layouts that are type as image, where the formal qualities of the lettering convey an idea. So for this one, we worked with Jessica Walsh. It was for a story on tensions within the new feminist movement that had sprung up as a response to Trump's election. And in this case, the materials were really important because they were a nod to the pink pussy hats that protesters were wearing, and also the fraying was a really, really important aspect because it was a nod to the tensions in the movement, and it gave it a real editorial kind of edge or voice. Many of the designers at the magazine make their own lettering or typography. The type here is drawn by Matt Willey, who's the magazine's art director. And you might wonder why we would choose to draw our own fonts when there are so many out there already. And often it's about control. In this case, it's about having letters with exactly the right shapes to fit in these boxes perfectly. Sometimes it's about getting a specific visual reference in. Ben, our deputy art director, drew this font for this story about dinner parties in New York. And he wanted the layout to have a subtle New York feel. So he took inspiration from New York City subway signs. So people in the magazine industry often say that if a magazine is well branded, you should be able to see a page of the magazine in isolation, like say if you just found it on the ground, and know what magazine it came out of. And type is a really big tool for that. But even with all this typographic variation, I still think the magazine is recognizable as a brand. And I think it's actually the typographic experimentation and the idea of visualizing our content through the design that is the thing that is one of the defining traits or holds it together. So now I'm going to show you a video of covers and spreads from the magazine just to give you more of a sense of how it looks from week to week. Thank you. On a normal week, we have 3 to 4 features on different topics, and then about 16 times a year, we do special issues, which are our themed issues and are really our most ambitious packages. And that's when we often redesign the whole magazine, we use different typefaces, different grids, we think about the structure differently, so it's not necessarily 4 related feature stories, but it's often thinking about the magazine as more of a container to tell a much more varied story. And we're usually really looking to create a typographic language in service of that topic that really brands that issue and sets it apart. So what you're looking at is the most extensive redesign of the magazine we've done for a special issue. It was for our New York issue that had a theme of life above 800 feet. So it had this fold-out cover, and Matt, the magazine's art director, had the idea to flip the magazine 90 degrees and create this vertical format, which helped to showcase New York super tall buildings. And the photography was specially commissioned for this format. It was really important to us to have everything in this vertical orientation because we thought having to rotate back and forth would be really cumbersome for readers and not an enjoyable experience. So even the ads were turned, and that involved our ad sales team going back to all of our advertisers and asking them to redesign their ads to fit in the new format, which luckily all of them did agree to do that. And Matt drew a typeface for the issue. And again, there are a number of condensed, or many, many condensed fonts out there that we could have used. But Matt drew this one to be super simple so that it would be easy to lengthen and shorten to fit in the spaces that we had to work in the magazine. And that allowed him to do things like this. And this. And I want to give credit to our editor, Jake, here. Most editors would have rejected this idea out of hand, but he went with it, and he had the editorial team write and rewrite all the headlines to fit within the design. This is a map of all the buildings over 800 feet in Manhattan. We initially started off with buildings over 1,000 feet. Turns out there's just not enough going on up there. So we had to switch it over and make it 800. So, oops, sorry, let's skip past that. This is the biggest type we've ever published in the magazine. And we realized as we were making this that the type could be pretty hard to read, but we were okay with that because all of the, we felt like it functioned more as an illustration, and all of the really important information was actually in the subhead. So I mentioned that we initially thought of this format as a way to showcase the tall buildings, but this is actually my favorite spread in the magazine. I just thought it was really powerful to come to this portrait of a construction worker that is larger than life, and that was, because the format allowed that. And even the crossword puzzles were turned. And this issue was pretty well received, for the most part, and we knew we would get criticism for this, but we still felt it was worth doing. It's one of 52 magazines, which gives us a little bit more freedom. At the same time, we don't take these risks lightly. We really only do it when it adds something, we feel it really adds something to the experience or the content of the magazine. So all the stories in the magazine appear in print and digitally. This is a version of the New York issue online, which uses the same typography, but it stretches. Okay. And this is our music issue from this year, and instead, again, of 4 features, it's a list of 25 songs that are entry points to talk about where music is headed today. We decided to do a split run of covers for this, and these are all shot by Ryan McKinley. And we really wanted to capture a sense of movement and joy and really capture a little bit of the spirit of music with these instead of doing something that felt more posed. So the interior combined a really rough and ready zine aesthetic with drawn line, and again, that was relating to the fluidity and the energy of music. And this is what the interior looked like. And this is the desktop translation of this issue. And I think this one's particularly good because you actually get to hear the music. So this is the Olympics issue that we published this past February. We wanted to take a more artful approach to our coverage of the Olympics because we wanted to set what we did apart from what other magazines might do. So this cover is by Idris Khan. He's a British artist that overlays found imagery to give this sense of motion. So again, it was not a typical structure. It was more of a list. There were 15 pieces, one on each of the sports in the Winter Olympics. And the lengths really varied quite a bit. Some of the pieces were written through, some were just an image with a deep caption. But the one thing that we knew about the issue before we started was that it was going to be really packed. So we wanted to find some way of making sure that we could get graphic impact within a tight space. So Matt came up with this idea of a stacked typeface, and he drew the first letters and then collaborated with Henrik to finish it. And I think it made for a really unique typographic identity. And this one looked really good on mobile because the type is vertical and it was great for the scrolling. So not every issue is as aggressively designed as the ones I've shown. This is an issue that we published last August, and it was devoted to one 40,000-word story about the history of Arab Spring, told through the eyes of 6 people whose lives it changed. It was the result of 18 months of reporting by the writer, Scott Anderson, and we used photos by Paolo Pellegrin. We both sent him to take photos that related to the story and also drew on an archive of his of covering the region for 20 years. to just show the visual history. And this was intended to read like a book from the start. It had no ads, so it had this wraparound cover. And I'm just going to show you the first 20 pages, spread by spread. This is the inside cover and first page. So it was a very stripped down opening. And if you think about magazines in general, oftentimes, you know, you have all these ads and it's very busy and chaotic. But this one is very different. And on the left here, this is the only ad, if you can call it that. It's more like a statement of purpose from the Pulitzer Center. And so if you notice, there are none of the typical enticements to read that magazines have. No drop caps, pull quotes. The imagery is usually pretty regimented. It's rigidly formatted, and it's very focused on the writing. But I think that's what gives it the kind of weight that was needed for this really serious topic. So since our special issues are such a big part of our brand, and because a lot of them are really some of our best pieces of design, I'm going to show you a clip of some of our other recent ones. I'm going to start off with our most recent special issue, which was about Love in New York. It was shot in one 24-hour period. We actually did a split run of 24 covers for it. I'm not going to show you all of those, but I put in enough so that you can get a taste of what they're like. But here it goes. So making the magazine is a collaborative effort by nature. It's also one of the things that I love best about it. And this one is made by a fantastically talented group of designers that I feel really lucky to work with. These are the designers that are currently in our department. And these are former staff members and freelancers who've also contributed to work in this presentation. And that's it.